Am I the asshole? For ruining thousands of kids' Halloween and not feeling bad about it? I live in a large neighborhood, about 90 houses. We are what's considered the rich neighborhood. So our neighborhood has always been a hotspot for trick-or-treaters. We used to get about 700–1,000 kids a year. I've always loved getting trick-or-treaters because my kids are teens now and don't trick-or-treat anymore. But in the last 4 years, it's gotten ridiculous. There's thousands of kids and their parents flooding the streets, people with hay in their rigs carrying kids around, trampling yards, littering candy wrappers everywhere, and the amount of small children walking around by themselves is appalling. People from the neighboring town of 30,000 people take their kids to my neighborhood. I was annoyed, but I never really did anything about it till 2 years ago. My daughter tripped and broke her arm. We didn't think it was a break, but we wanted to go to the anyway to get it checked out, and there were so many people in our neighborhood, we couldn't get out. There were cars everywhere, lining the streets, parked in people's yards. It was horrible. We had to wait until everyone left, about 1 a.m., to go to the hospital. My daughter had to wait in pain for hours. At that point, I was done. I contacted the neighborhood community and we managed to get some folks, cops mostly, to stand at the gate with a list and only let in certain people. Folks that live here, family members, friends. If you wanted to get in, you had to be close to someone in the neighborhood. It was great. There were only about 300 kids in the neighborhood and after there was barely any trash. And we're doing it again this year. I recently told my sister what I have done, and she got really angry. When we were kids, we had to trick or treat in other neighborhoods because we lived in a trailer park with no other kids. She told me I was a horrible person for ruining thousands of kids' Halloween. But honestly, I'm not too broken up about it. It was a hazard. If there was a fire or an emergency, no one would be able to get in to help. When I was a kid, there was never any cars lining the streets. The residences could get out if they wanted. It was never dangerous. I don't think I'm in the wrong, but I've always respected my sister's opinion. Am I the asshole? And #X200B. Info. There was no one in the cars. They were parked in the middle of the road and in yards, so there was no way for me or an ambulance to get through unless every driver in that neighbor at the same time went to their cars at the same time and drove out. My daughter was 13 and in that awkward phase where she doesn't want to bother anyone for help, and said it didn't hurt that bad.
Not the asshole. People still need to behave. The kids can still have fun. Parents just have to actually parent them now because someone else is watching.
Your neighborhood is not set up for carnival. If the number of people and vehicles obstruct essentially services, then that's beyond ridiculous. Also, let's not forget the plague at the moment. Crowds like that should be banned at this time. Not the asshole. Not the asshole. The other parents of the trick-or-treaters are TAs. The parents should have taught their kids to learn how to respect other people's property. The parents should have respected your neighborhood's environment. Letting their kids run around unsupervised, parking in people's lawns, and flooding the streets is beyond ungracious on their part.
Not the asshole. Our neighborhood had to do the same things a few years back. The garbage and vandalism was out of control. There would be adults who would come from other towns and drop off van loads full of kids into our small neighborhood. Houses would be egged, mailboxes crushed, etc. Finally, the police carded anyone who tried to enter our neighborhood and the problem stopped. The next year, the local towns started doing trunk-or-treating and that significantly cut down on the neighborhood trick-or-treaters. Isn't the whole point of gated neighborhoods that people who aren't in any way close to someone living there won't get in?
Not the asshole. Trick-or-treating in the more rich neighborhoods is a privilege, not a right. They mess stuff up, litter all over the place, they lose that privilege. Not to mention, as you said, that many people around at once is a hazard in the face of emergency.
Not the asshole. It sucks for those kids, it really does. But when this became a hazard to people's safety and ability to get medical attention, something had to be done. I'm sure there are other neighborhoods that children can go to. Not just the richest one. You didn't ruin Halloween for anyone. You made it easier on others in your neighborhood.
Nah, but I agree with you, Fuwalda. You should have called 911 and told them you had an injured child and couldn't get to a hospital.
Not the asshole. The fact that trash is littered is horrible. It's okay to go places, but if they are gonna behave like that, might as well not go. And you're right about the hazards though.
Not the asshole, but I would not publicize your involvement in closing the street. Lots of people will hate you for it. I personally think you are right because of the hazard. People are focusing on your daughter instead of the story at hand. The question was, are you the asshole for not allowing everyone in? If she has to call the ambulance and police and her daughter was in pain and still couldn't get there before 1 a.m., shouldn't that be a reason? Not the asshole.
NTA, your street isn't a theme park for others to trash.
Why couldn't the city just post and enforce no parking signs? People can still come if they really want and find other parking or carpool or find something closer. Info. Lol, so you just let your daughter sit in her pain and didn't think to call 911 for an ambulance. Not the asshole. While it sucks that not every kid can go trick-or-treating in their own neighborhood, the slack can't be picked up by one neighborhood alone. People from another town going there is absolutely ridiculous and unnecessary.
Not the asshole. The least they could do is be more neighborly themselves. Going into any private community is a privilege and that was abused. Furthermore, with the nature of your community, I bet it was mutually driven decision and not just done because of your concerns.
You got cops as bouncers and get thousands of trick-or-treaters. Just where the fuck do you live?
Not the asshole. It got out of hand. We had a similar thing happen with a local Christmas light display. One family would go all out with their lights, even having other child-friendly activities. People all over the area would drive to their house and park their cars in the neighbors' driveways and yards. They would then walk through the yards of the neighbors, and were causing problems. The neighbors complained about it to local authorities, and the family was forced greatly limit the entire thing. So now it's just a drive-through Christmas light display. No parking or getting out of your car. People suck and ruin fun things for everyone else. You didn't ruin it.
Not the asshole. Plus COVID, so trick-or-treating is cancelled in a lot of places anyway. Surprised it is not everywhere.
No, it got out of control. It was an unsafe environment for the kids coming to your neighborhood as well. I'm sure everyone adapted and moved on to other neighborhoods. Sometimes a reset is necessary.
Not the asshole. It does sound dangerous to have the neighborhood choked with so many vehicles and people.
Not the asshole. It was a hazard. If there was a fire or an emergency, no one would be able to get in to help. You don't need any further explanation. They were disrespectful of your property and were a health hazard. Where I used to live, most of people that did this weren't in your childhood situation. Most of the people coming to your neighborhood are there for the bigger, better candy. And even if they were, there are other neighborhoods for them to visit.
Nah, safety is often overlooked on Halloween.
When I was a kid, we would go trick-or-treating at a nearby rather large gated community. They ran it basically the same way. You had to be on the list. There were households that threw parties and invited a fair few people, households that only invited a few, and some that didn't invite anyone. It made for a boisterous but not unmanageable Halloween in that community. The one year they decided to just open it to the public, there was mass vandalism, petty theft, and a cop car was set on fire. This is why we can't have nice things. Long story short, not the asshole.
Not the asshole. Don't feel bad at all.
Not the asshole for Halloween and all that. But you are the asshole for not calling an ambulance or honestly even an Uber. I see your info about cars being parked in the middle, but it's not impossible to walk to the end of the neighborhood and have the ambulance or Uber pick you and your daughter up there. Honestly, if it was a bigger emergency, the ambulance would even have driven partially on the sidewalk or into yards if necessary. Not the asshole. You are dealing with a security question. What if someone had a heart attack or, God forbid, a stroke? Even a fire could be a disaster under such conditions. I get that kids want to go to other streets and neighborhoods to trick or treat. It's a great opportunity for people to say hi to each other and have a small connection. And for kids to stock up on much important candy. I am, however, of the opinion that if you can't walk to a house for trick or treat, you don't go there by car. There are of course a few exceptions to this rule.
Not the asshole. As a kid, we lived out in a rural area, so the only way to trick or treat was drive into town for a neighborhood. My mom would park at some nearby store. Most of the time, as was a ways away from the neighborhood, and all four of us, me, mom, bro and sis, would walk to the neighborhoods, then start trick or treating. It's not that hard to find a way to do things that doesn't inconvenience everyone else. And the letting the kids run around alone and leave trash is ridiculous.
Not the asshole. I'm going to sound old and grumpy, but whatever happened to parents walking around their own neighborhood with their kids? The past several years, I see kids being driven around. I can see driving kids to a nearby neighborhood if their own neighborhood is small and doesn't participate, but this sounds absurd and dangerous. Who just parks cars and blocks streets? This is ridiculous. Plus, don't people want to give out candy and check out costumes of kids they might actually know? It's supposed to be a fun tradition and it just becomes meaningless.
Not the asshole. One other point I think hasn't been brought up is the ridiculous cost when you have hundreds of kids showing up. I lived in one of these flooded neighborhoods at one time, and was a single mother at the time. The first year I spent way too much trying to give out candy to everyone. After that I shut off my porch light when what I could afford was gone, after only 30 minutes. Not to mention the grown-ass adults with bags right next to their kid, or the sick kids at home stories. Nah, not the asshole. I would do the same in my Suburban.
Not the asshole. The assholes bringing their kids into your neighborhood and fucking it up for the people that actually live there are horrendous assholes.
Not the asshole. I would have called 911 and told them multiple vehicles are prohibiting vehicular movement and you were essentially trapped in your house. And if cops didn't show up within a reasonable amount of time, I would have called a tow truck company and asked for their advice. It doesn't matter why you need to be able to exit your neighborhood in your car. What they were doing is illegal for several reasons. No worries about disappointing the children this year. We are in a pandemic. Of course it's going to be much different, with less trick-or-treaters and less houses giving out candy than in the before times. Who is letting strange kids mob their porch this Halloween? Who is letting their kid go door to door this year?
I'm against the grain here, but you are the asshole. I think a better solution was stricter parking enforcement, but I also think if you thought your daughter fell and broke her arm and you couldn't possibly get out, call an ambulance. Don't let your kid sit for hours in pain.
Not the asshole. You didn't cancel Halloween for anyone. Those parents just need to be more responsible.
Not the asshole. Not your community, then don't trick or treat in it. It's that simple.
Not the asshole. That's tacky as hell, releasing your kids into richer neighborhoods to collect candy and leave your car blocking everyone while doing so.
Not the asshole. You're right that it's a safety hazard. Had you been in a bigger town, cops would have prevented it or required a permit for blocking the road in future years and organized parking. Also, a maybe broken arm isn't a reason to call 911. 911 is an emergency line, and if the daughter claimed she was okay and the situation wasn't getting worse, then there was no reason to call.
Have you tried making them park outside the gate and only letting kids in on foot? This story is appalling. I also live in a neighborhood that used to be popular with kids from other areas. Difference is, the outside kids were always polite and grateful. Haven't done Halloween in a few years though. The religious types kinda put a kibosh on it here.
Not the asshole. You didn't ruin anything. The parents who came to your neighborhood and condoned the appalling behavior is what ruined it. What if someone had a heart attack? They would have died if an ambulance couldn't get through. Also, with COVID, do you really want hundreds or thousands of random people coming to your house?
Not the asshole. Dishonor on everyone trying to shame you for this, or for not calling an ambulance when you gave plenty of info on why an ambulance wouldn't have been able to come through. In the end, you may very well have prevented future incidents. Incidents such as someone in the neighborhood having a medical emergency. You mentioned there were a number of small children running around unattended. What if someone took advantage of that and tried abducting one or two of them? In such chaos, who knows just how many bad things could happen. So no, Op. You did the right thing.
Not the asshole. I always laugh when I get the kids with deep voice who are 6 foot tall, but we never get hordes of kids, so it isn't a problem. What you describe is a disaster. And even with restrictions you still get 300 kids. Good grief. Your sister needs a reality check. There are other neighborhoods these kids can hit without swarming and destroying yours. What if a resident had a heart attack instead of your daughter's broken arm?
In I'd go you are the asshole. But littering people need to be put in the asshole category as well. Everyone is correct. In the case of an emergency, people need to get out, and emergency vehicles need to be able to get in. However, it sounds like the solution was to ban cars, not ban children. I lived in a neighborhood like this. After working a brutal 12-hour shift and getting off at 7, I drove home and waited an hour to get to my house from the housing tract gates. 1/4 mile. I love Halloween, but this is unacceptable. The fact that you couldn't get out to get to the hospital scares the crap out of me.
My neighborhood is like that. Without anyone asking, the police close the roads for parking because it is dangerous if an emergency vehicle needs to get in or out. That said, people just park in a lot within reasonable walking distance and walk over. Love having the kids come, but feel much safer without the cars.
Not the arsehole. I was in a similar situation trying to leave for work and couldn't get out of the neighborhood, but my neighborhood wasn't rich. I liked that people having fun, but didn't like how people dumped their garbage everywhere and blocked traffic. Your situation was worse and safety candy. Those outsiders who have an issue with it should organize their own Halloween events, invite the swarm of people to their own neighborhoods. They can be the change they want to see, as the quote goes. It's fun in theory to be known as the Halloween neighborhood, but the reality is much different a lot of times.
Posts like this pop up each October.
Not the asshole. It's not your job to fix this problem. It's a bummer and between a rock and a hard place, but you didn't cancel Halloween. Why would it be your responsibility to find an alternative method when your issue is you couldn't get your child safely from your home? Like I said, the whole situation sucks, but you did what you had to. Clearly your community doesn't disagree, or at least not the point of changing it themselves. NTA. This happened to my friend because her neighborhood had Christmas lights that were amazing. The only entrance was a two-way street, so for months starting in November to January she couldn't get home in less than 3 hours as the line is long. Their kid had a medical emergency and the ambulance couldn't get there and they had to airlift them out. After that, they fought and won. No more Christmas lights in the neighborhood.
You are the asshole. Unless you live in a gated community with a private road, you have no authority to deny people entry regardless of how annoying they are. If the trick-or-treaters are illegally parking and obstructing traffic, you should report them. If your neighbors would stop giving out the good candy, the problem would solve itself.